And good afternoon, good evening, and good night, and welcome to Aussie Overlaw'd covers the ANZAC Day Dawn service. We're about 20 minutes out from the actual coverage, so I'm going to give everybody a little bit of a brief crash course. Where are we? I hope everyone's doing well. It's just gone 5 in the morning. I'm still waking up, unfortunately. Okay, so let me just make sure I got all this right. Hammer across here. Right. So, for all you foreigners, what is ANZAC Day about? ANZAC Day falls on the 25th of April each year, and it was officially named ANZAC Day in 1916. ANZAC stands for the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps. On the 25th of April 1915, the Australian and New Zealand soldiers formed part of the Allied expedition that set out to capture the Gallipoli Peninsula in Turkey. These became known as the ANZACs, and the pride that they took in the name continues to this day. So why is it so special to Australians? On the morning of the 25th of April 1915, the ANZACs set out to capture Gallipoli in order to open the Dardanelles to the Allied navies. The objective was to capture Constantinople, now Istanbul, in Turkey, the capital of the Ottoman Empire and an ally of Germany. The ANZACs landed on Gallipoli and met fierce resistance from the Ottoman Turkish defenders. Their plan to knock out Turkey from the war quickly became a stalemate, and the campaign dragged for 8 months. Yeah, 8 months, because where they landed was more or less an incredibly steep area of land that they were not supposed to land on, and for some reason they decided to keep pushing forward. At the end of 1915, the Allied forces were evacuated. Both sides had suffered heavy casualties and endured great hardships. Over 8,000 Australian soldiers had been killed. News of the landing in Gallipoli and the events that followed had a profound effect on Australians at home. The 25th of April soon became the day on which Australians remembered their sacrifice for those who had died in the war. The ANZACs were courageous, and although the Gallipoli campaign failed in its military objectives, the Australian and New Zealand actions during the campaign left us all with a very powerful legacy. With the coming of the Second World War, ANZAC Day also serves as a day to commemorate the lives of the Australians who died in that war. The meaning of ANZAC Day today includes a remembrance of all Australians killed in military operations. ANZAC Day Remembrance takes 2 forms: commemorative services held at dawn, the time of the original landing in Gallipoli, across the nation. Later in the day, ex-servicemen and women meet to take part in marches through the major cities and in many small city centres. Commemorative ceremonies are more formal and are held at war memorials around the country. A typical ANZAC Day ceremony may include having a hymn, a prayer, an address, laying of wreaths, the recitation, the last post, always, a period of silence, and either the rouse or the reveal, and the national anthem. After the memorial's ceremony, families often place red poppies beside the names of relatives on the memorial's roll of honour, as they do so after Remembrance Day services. Rosemary is also traditionally worn on ANZAC Day, and sometimes on Remembrance Day. Rosemary has particular significance for Australians, as it was found growing wild on the Gallipoli Peninsula. Since ancient times, the aromatic herb has been believed to have properties to improve memory. And you also may or may not know about the ANZAC biscuit. These things are legendary. we sell them all year round in most of our supermarkets. And during World War One, the friends and families of soldiers and community groups sent food to the fighting men. Due to the time delays in getting food to the front lines, the food sent had to remain edible, without refrigeration for long periods of time that retained high nutritional value. And thus, the ANZAC biscuit was born. Although there are variations, the basic ingredients are rolled oats, sugar, plain flour, coconut, butter, golden syrup or treacle, bicarbonate of soda, and boiling water. These things are delicious, and they last forever. Oh. Thank you very much for the super chat, American Dreamer, and absolutely, may they rest in peace. Sorry, I wasn't actually paying attention to chat. Let me just have a quick look. Oh, good. Jason got a notification today. Just for anyone that's wondering, there will be a usual Law News and Laughter after this. Oh, thank you, Digger. The ceremony itself goes for about an hour. London Dawn service is tomorrow morning for you? Okay. Didn't know I was part of this. Should have warned me and I would have dressed up. It's all fine. Those heroes that shed their blood and lost their lives, you're now lying in the soil of a friendly country, therefore rest in peace. There is no difference between the Johnnies and the Mehmets. Okay. Just learned what ANZAC Day is, and is it true it's more important than Remembrance Day for you guys? Absolutely. For us it is. It's definitely more important than Australia Day, that's for sure. Commemorates all Australian and New Zealanders who served and died in all wars, conflicts and peacekeeping missions, contribution and suffering of all those who have served. Absolutely. Yeah, Gallipoli was ugly. Show us a biscuit. Bob, I wish I had the stones to have, but no. And no, Australia and New Zealand, they did, but they don't currently have a draft. Happy patriotic Aussie holiday. Yes, we do. So in the memorial in Canberra, we have the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, which was a soldier that was removed from the battlefield, interred because no one was able to identify them. So it's representative of every Australian soldier that lost their life. So... Oh, of course we still wear the poppies proudly. Okay. Now, I have got the Shrine of Remembrance feed up. I'm just waiting for that to go live, which should be another 10-15 minutes. If in the offshot chance that because it is... They haven't done it under the Creative Commons. In the offshot chance that it gets struck down, then we'll find other things to sort out. But, yeah. Hang on, someone asked about the ANZAC biscuit. Okay. I don't really want to use the Wikipedia. Where's one of the recipes? Because the ANZAC Day recipe for it actually is protected, I do believe. Where is that? ANZAC Day biscuit rules. Okay, so this is from 2019, but it'll... Yeah, Flux, I do believe it's more or less the same. In the US, the DNA identified the unknown soldier in Arlington. Oh, really? Wow. That's great. Okay. There are rules for ANZAC biscuits, so what can be changed without upsetting people? These days you find... Oh, wait, hang on. So that's what an ANZAC Day biscuit looks like. And these are the ones that used to get shipped off. I mean, you still buy them every other day. We'll actually be making some with Little Lady Overlaw'd later today, which I think she's going to really enjoy, because she's right at that age. These days you can find ANZAC biscuit recipes that contain everything from quinoa flour to wattle seed. Across the country, bakers and chefs are putting their own spin on the iconic biscuits. That's un-Australian, but anyway. Adding chocolate ganache? Nope. Or mixing baked biscuits through ice cream. Yeah, okay, that I can get behind. But for some of us, it's hard to imagine an ANZAC biscuit without the classic golden syrup taste. The iconic flavour actually tells us a lot about when they were first made in 1915 during World War One. The Australian and New Zealand women used golden syrup to bind the biscuits, not eggs, so that the biscuits could survive the 2 to 3 month trip to the troops in France. There was also another reason for not using the eggs. Culinary historian Alison Reynolds points out that in her book ANZAC Biscuits, the Power and Spirit of a National Everyday Icon, the many poultry farmers left to fight overseas, which had a large impact on egg production. So whether you're planning to bake your own or buy some this April, here's what you need to know about the biscuits today, from classic to the experimental. Whatever you favour, just don't call them ANZAC cookies. Referring to these products as ANZAC cookies is generally not approved due to non-Australian overtones, the Department of Veterans Affairs advises. It's actually covered by the Department of Veterans Affairs that the ANZAC biscuits are not cookies, because we don't really refer to biscuits as cookies here in Australia. Do you eat the biscuits with Vegemite? Oh, God, no. Yes, you can dip the biscuits into tea, absolutely. Let me go home and check the mail, because I know you sent me some. I might have taken it. Okay. So there are rules about ANZAC Day biscuits. Aside from avoiding the word cookie, the Department of Veterans Affairs has other guidelines when it comes to ANZAC Day biscuits. They must not substantially deviate from the traditional recipe and shape, meaning novelty-shaped biscuits are out. The Australian War Memorial lists 3 recipes, including one that's made without coconut. And while ANZAC biscuits are the only purely commercial use of the word ANZAC that's generally approved, the word must still be used respectfully and especially in advertising. It may come as a surprise that the creator of Australia's most Instagrammed cake, a watermelon and strawberry layer cake that people queue for, is firmly in favour of the classic ANZAC biscuit. While our experimental spirits means we often put a personal twist on classic cakes and pastries, ANZAC Day is a solemn event, and I've always thought it best to respect the day and make ANZAC biscuits in the traditional way, says Christopher Tay from the bakery in Sydney's Newtown. Another fan of the original recipe is Monique Bowley, who won a blue ribbon for her ANZAC biscuits at the Royal Adelaide Show. Since taking out the title in 2008, however, the former baking show contestant and ABC podcast producer has made a slight adjustment to her recipe. A show prize-winning biscuit needs to snap when it's broken. It's really crunchy. Ooh, I disagree with that. But I like them chewy. I'm a big chewy fan, yes. Because the golden syrup, the treacle, needs to be in enough of a proportion that they are nice and chewy. Serious non-trolling question, do Aussies eat emu eggs? Is that legal? You can buy them. Generally not gonna... It's not like it's something that you find... It's not like kangaroo that you can find in the supermarket, though. Like, you'd need to get it from a farmer or a producer. So... but I like them chewy. I'm a big chewy fan, so the biscuits I make for show judging are different to the biscuits that I make for normal eating. Monique, who's slightly tweaked a woman's weekly recipe for normal eating, notes that most ANZAC recipes are very similar and achievable too. If you're a baking novice, you don't need any fancy equipment, you just need a wooden spoon and a stove, and should have butter in the fridge. You should have the oats in the pantry, and the sugar, and hopefully coconut. It's not a huge amount of fancy ingredients. No, and that was sort of the whole point, was that it was something that everyone back home at the time could make from whatever staples they had. You can get kangaroo at the grocery store. Depends on the grocery store, but yeah. Emu eggs, big like ostrich eggs. Yes. So want to try kangaroo and camel? Well, we got plenty of camels too. We make a syrup cookie that will fill with date filling, 2 cookies. Uses white syrup, no oatmeal, no coconut. Have to roll those out and cut them into rounds. Old recipe. Interesting. Okay. Lesson 2. Add your own twist on the ANZAC biscuit. For a luxe version, look no further than Andy Birdie's ANZAC biscuits that are sold with a rosemary-infused chocolate ganache and golden syrup buttercream filling. Okay. From his bakery and patisserie in Sydney's Inner West, Andy says it's fine to add your own twist as long as it doesn't detract from the original. There's no point doing it if it's just a gimmick and it tastes bad. I don't do that without tasting everything and make sure that it's true to what it was. Juan and Dave Bransgrove run a cafe not far from the ANZAC Memorial in Sydney CBD. Their recipe belongs to Dave's mum, a professional baker in New Zealand known for her wedding cakes. Well, there you go. We updated the recipe a bit because we wanted it to be a little bit different and a bit more Aussie. We love everything Australian in the shop, so it's about how to incorporate that love with healthy ingredients. Juan and Dave's recipe for ANZAC biscuits has wattle seed, quinoa, oats, quinoa flour, and regular flour, golden syrup, coconut, and butter. I don't know how I feel about the quinoa, honestly. It seems a bit much. Alright, 8 minutes 55 till it goes live. Sorry, I'm just checking in on the War Memorial stream just to be safe. The result in Dave's French bistro-trained hands is a biscuit that is crispy on the inside and chewy in the middle. Okay, that sounds a bit better. At John Marshall's dessert laboratory in Canberra, in the suburb of Braden, he makes ANZAC biscuits using a traditional recipe, then adds his ice cream base to be churned. I made this type of ice cream for over 15 years, and my wife has taken some to the War Memorial to share with the co-workers where she used to work there. Lovely. Whatever path you choose, a black baking tray will absorb heat, so use a silver tray if you don't want your biscuits to be dark or worse, burn on the bottom. Quality ingredients also help. My biggest tip would be to go out and splurge on a new packet of bicarb soda, and maybe even a new tub of golden syrup. I should hope so. Every time I've stuffed up my ANZACs, it's because I've used old bicarb and old golden syrup. Also suggest starting with good butter. Want to make your own ANZAC biscuit ice cream? Choose a good vanilla ice cream as a base, then add lots of broken up ANZAC biscuits prior to serving. This will give it both texture and flavour, and if you really want to do something special, you could also drizzle a good tablespoon of Australian honey over the top. Yum! If you're selling at a fundraiser, consider donating to the ANZAC affiliated organisations, the way the biscuits were originally intended to do during the wartime. For example, Christopher donates money raised to the Vietnam Veterans Association of Australia, which helps return soldiers suffering from PTSD. Well, there you go. So yeah, for anyone that's wondering, that's what an ANZAC biscuit looks like. Would we frown upon to make tiramisu out of the cookies? Yes, Brian, very much so. Hang on, where is... Oh, hang on, is that... Can't tell if that's under Creative Commons or not. What the hell? We can watch this.
Every year in Australia, we commemorate a very important day in Australian history known as ANZAC Day. At this time of the year, you might sometimes bake ANZAC biscuits, or stand in silence to reflect and remember ANZAC soldiers. But do you know who the ANZACs were and why it is important that we commemorate this day? In 1914, the world was in turmoil at the outbreak of World War I. Though Australia and New Zealand were considered young nations, both of these countries came together to help their British allies in the war. These soldiers were called ANZACs, which stands for Australia and New Zealand Army Corps. On the 25th of April 1915, the ANZACs travelled to a place called the Gallipoli Peninsula to capture the Turkish capital of Istanbul, known then as Constantinople. However, they were met by a fierce defence from Ottoman Turkish soldiers. What they had hoped to be a quick campaign turned out to be 8 months of brutal warfare. 8 months after their arrival, the
Happy. Well, it's more of a, yeah. You don't really say Happy Anzac Day, but thank you, Wildred. I appreciate that. And thank you for your very generous super chat. Not at that stage, Griff. We weren't. We had officially already sorted ourselves out and become a nation.
ANZACs evacuated from Gallipoli, but not before many soldiers had given their life or suffered great injuries. In fact, over 10,000 ANZACs died at the fierce hand of the war at Gallipoli. Upon their return, Australia has commemorated ANZAC Day since the 25th of April 1916, 1 year after the ANZACs first arrived at Gallipoli. There are many symbols and emblems that you might recognise on ANZAC Day. Let's have a look at a few of them.
Solemn Day.
Yum, an ANZAC biscuit. It can be fun to help bake these.
And I wasn't going to pause it while I was on the march, but for someone asked whether or not we have the day off. Yes, it is a public holiday. It's the 1 day a year where you're allowed to play 2-up as well, which is they've sort of, it's a very specific gambling game, but you only really play it at the Return and Services League on Anzac Day. Shops, everything is closed at least until 1 p.m. So it's, and it is more of a solemn day.
And even more fun to eat around ANZAC Day. But it's a bit funny to remember ANZAC Day by eating a biscuit, isn't it? Where did they come from? The ANZAC biscuit we have today is similar to a type of food many of the ANZAC soldiers carried with them. Because they didn't have fridges or shops to get food from, the soldiers needed to eat food that would not go bad over time. Many carried the first ANZAC biscuits, which were a substitute for bread. Though they can be a tasty treat, they also help us remember some of the struggles ANZAC soldiers went through. Another symbol you might recognise are flowers, such as red poppies or rosemary flowers. Red poppies were famously found growing in some of the most brutal locations of World War I, such as northern France and Belgium, after the war had ended. Rosemary flowers symbolise memory and were found scattered throughout the peninsula at Gallipoli. Because these flowers are very symbolic, they are used as a way for us to remember those fallen by war. They can often be seen being laid down in remembrance of fallen soldiers during days such as ANZAC Day. The original ANZAC Day was significant because not only was it a day to remember and pay respects to the families and friends of those that had died in war, it also played a major part in forming an Australian identity of courage and mateship that is still important today. Whilst the ANZAC legend lives on, soldiers from Australia have defended our country in other wars since World War I. This means that when we commemorate ANZAC Day, we remember those that have given their lives in service of our country on other occasions as well.
That's sort of the point, Griff. 1901, so yeah, we'd only just really formed into our own nation, and we sent our sons, brothers, fathers, every able body that we could, basically into this battle. Someone asked what I do. I personally do make every endeavour to at least watch the dawn service each year, which is just about to start. Otherwise, barbecue. No, well, I mean, I have a barbecue anyway, but it's more of a solemn thing. I mean, there was one year during the bug where I think a whole bunch of people were standing. Everyone stood outside at the foot of our driveways and that sort of thing to commemorate. So, oh, I know you did too, Griff. I'm just saying we did it at a time when we were still founding our country, basically. So, all right, I want to quickly finish this.
There are many ways ANZAC Day is commemorated
post.
today. Often people will rise for a dawn service. These services are held at dawn each year because this was the same time ANZAC soldiers originally arrived on Gallipoli shores. What are some of the other ways we remember those in our past and present who have committed themselves to the service of our country on ANZAC Day?
Alright. Okay, so I'm going to switch to that and full screen that. So we're just waiting for it to start up now. And yeah, if you served, it was attended war memorials, then the pub with your mates. Someone also mentioned when I started this that I didn't stand for the anthem. I want everyone to know, firstly, that is in no way out of disrespect. I physically can't. Unfortunately, my foot's acting up, so I hobbled out of bed to get here to do this. Yeah, it's... Kaiser's right, it was absolutely brutal. I mean, I took Australian history twice. So during my schooling, during VCE and that sort of thing, I specifically requested to change out of geography and take Australian history a second time. Just because I thought that it was important for all that sort of stuff to be actually made more of a thing. Yeah, well, the foot comes and goes, but I just didn't want people to think that was out of disrespect or anything. Where are we? Okay. Alright, so the live stream's about to start. Oh, in the interim, how is everybody? It's been a while since I've done anything that hasn't been trial related or anything, so what else we got? Don't fret the standing, that's why here during the national anthem at sporting events I say if you're able to stand. Oh, that's good. Okay. Great War and WW2 week by week do incredible work covering the war in a way in which you can watch as it's progressed. Awesome. Go more in depth than any series. Fantastic. Kind of late, but is ANZAC an acronym? Yes, so it's the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps. They're the soldiers that were sent to fight during World War One. Sorry. Here we go.
Good morning. On behalf of RSL Victoria, welcome to the Shrine of Remembrance. As we come together on the lands of the Bunurong, I invite Uncle Shane Clark, Bunurong Elder, to present a welcome to country.
Thank you, Justin. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Wominjinka, welcome to the lands of the Bunurong. My name's Shane Clark, a traditional custodian of these lands of where we are today. As we always do, we start by acknowledging the ones that have come before us and pay our respects to our elders, both past and present. And we have elders here with us today. It's a great morning. We all come together and it's in strength. to pay our respects and to reflect, to acknowledge the ones that came before us, who dedicated and made that commitment, and we all have a connection to these people who've done the hard work, and so that we are here today. And I'd also like to extend my respects out to all our servicemen and women of the Australian services, and to our brothers and sisters of New Zealand. So all our Air Force, Navy, military, Army, we never forget that you are here today. And also like to just want to finish off, just a welcome to country, just to say a few words, and just to remember that we're always walking side by side. It's great to see everybody coming out this morning. And so Wumajinka, Oriya Wantalak Bunurong. Welcome all our friends to the lands of the Bunurong. Let's walk together and learn together, and stay well. Thank you.
Uncle Shane, thank you very much. And we wish to tell Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander attendees and viewers that this morning's presentation, which is beginning soon, contains images of deceased persons.
Yes, Glitterfart, they do a trigger warning for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders because they have issues with photos of the deceased, or those that have passed, whether or not it may, I believe it has something to do with sealing the souls or something. Griff, it hasn't even started yet, that was just the opening address.
Ladies and gentlemen, the dawn service begins at 6 o'clock this morning, and we will come back shortly.
I'm sorry, what?
With our presentation.
So that's the Shrine of Remembrance there. It'd be nice if they posted the itinerary. I don't have enough material to fill another 15 minutes, I'll be honest. I took the banner down, although I'm not sure whether or not it's going to be considered transformative enough. I believe so, MG. Honestly, Len H, not as much as they should do. It's quite disappointing, honestly. I do feel like our national patriotism and respect for our soldiers and military and that sort of thing, I do think that has well and truly gone by the wayside. And it's something that I have every intention of drumming into my daughter, is that you respect those that gave their lives for us to be able to live and breathe and walk free. And yeah. Barbara, I'm not quite sure what that was. I was thinking that myself. Oh, yes, please remember to hit the like button. And just double check if you're still subscribed. I think it's like I think I'm down 44 in the last month, as YouTube does. So the best time to visit's around this time. Yeah, look, generally summer is probably better. Any time December through February, you're going to get the most out of your time there. Like, just make sure you stay away from like the major beaches, because Bondi gets packed, and it's really not worth it. Just don't come in the winter. It's just cold and wet and rainy. Tradition here, some two Aboriginal bands do not like ours, as they're known to be harbinger of the dead. Oh, there you go. Every Anzac Day in Thailand is commemorated by conducting a dawn service and gunfire breakfast at the Hellfire Pass Interpretive Centre. Well, there you go. See, the Anzac tradition is held in so many countries. I think that's because so many people have respect for the Australian soldiers. I mean, Australian soldiers do have a penchant and a reputation for being a little bit crazy. I've shown that video of the American vet that came along the Australian guys while he was waiting for explosive ordnance disposal, and, you know, they just shot it and exploded. But yeah, national patriotism has disappeared all across Western countries, yeah, which is very, very disappointing. So, oh, you mean to see this? Oh yeah, absolutely. If you want to see this, then it's absolutely the best time. I mean, April's always going to be good because you've got if you're able to do 2 weeks, do them in mid to late April, because you can see the Easter stuff, and then you can see the Anzac Day ceremonies, and you'll get a little bit of a idea of what culture in Australia is like from different scenarios. Have I been to the UK? No, I haven't. I'm actually still waiting to get my passport. The trip in August to the US will be the first time I've left the country, which is why I'm really looking forward to it. The Australian soldiers were fierce fighters. Yeah, well, I mean, we're pretty fierce in most things. I'm not quite sure where people get this idea or interpretation that we're... Oh.
Hello, my name is Justin Smith, and it's an honour to be standing here with you in this place before dawn. Please ensure your mobile phone is put on silent, and good morning.
Point.
The dawn service will begin at 6 with the official ceremony. Just first, we'd like to pay tribute to Mr. Peter Meehan for the way he has performed this very role from this very lectern for the last 10 years. Peter is a retired squadron leader of the Royal Australian Air Force Specialist Reserve and a current governor of our Shrine of Remembrance. For your beautiful words and your service through the years. Thank you, Peter. We're here before the soft lights of dawn to be grateful for the lives we have and to thank those who gave up so much so that we could have them. We're here to tell the servicemen and servicewomen and their families that we understand the sacrifice and the courage, and that we will always remember. We thank the ones who are here with us this morning, the ones who are gone, and the ones who were lost long before they could have full lives of their own. Most didn't plan to be soldiers, none planned to be widows, and no child expected to grow up without a father or mother. But it's what happened, and it was done for us. So as we move closer to daylight, around the flame or in the dark, we say thank you, forever. Thank you. This year marks the 70th anniversary of the end of the Korean War. To the veterans of Korea who are here this morning or watching and listening from somewhere else, welcome. Without flattery, Korea has been called the Forgotten War. In 1950, the bitter shock and sacrifice of World War II was still with us. Australia remained under war rationing for necessities like petrol and tea and butter, and we want nothing to do with war. But in a place called Korea, the North invaded the South, and so we were at war again. First, it was our Royal Australian Navy with the HMAS Shoalhaven and Bataan, and the Royal Australian Air Force arriving within days of the invasion. And coming out of the long winter of fighting in 1951, where it was so cold the decks of the ships were covered with snow, and the soldiers on land couldn't leave their boots outside because the icy night would turn them to concrete. The men of the 3rd Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment fought one of our hardest battles in Korea, the Battle of Kapyong. Joined by their ANZAC comrades from New Zealand, as well as a Canadian battalion, British forces, and United States tanks and cavalry, the 3rd Battalion fought back a Chinese attack that was determined to take the city of Seoul. Our United Nations forces were vastly outnumbered, but they fought for almost 5 days through the day and the night, and Seoul wasn't taken, and it never was, even to this day. The Battle of Kapyong can be spoken of among Australia's strongest and bravest moments. And the 3rd Battalion was awarded the US Presidential Unit Citation. But there was loss, as there always was. 32 Australian troops were killed and 59 wounded and 3 taken prisoner. And after the battle, the bravery continued with those 3 prisoners of war. One was Private Horace Madden. The boys called him Slim. As a prisoner of the Chinese, Slim refused to cooperate with his captors. In the greatest of Australian ways, he was a troublemaker. But as a result, he was beaten and denied food, and what little food he did have, he often gave to his comrades, who he thought were in need more than himself. His behaviour and determination inspired everyone around him and kept others going when they were running low on reasons. One of his mates said this: Slim was a hero. He didn't try to be like that, it was just the way he was made. Nothing could make him cooperate with the enemy. But Horace Madden died in the POW camp from malnutrition and bad treatment in the November of 1951. But the inspiration continued. His actions as a prisoner of war were so strong that he was posthumously awarded the George Cross, the non-combat equivalent of the Victoria Cross. It was the highest decoration given to an Australian in the Korean War. And it's impossible to speak of the Battle of Kapyong without the name of Captain Reginald Saunders. Reg Saunders was the first Indigenous man to be commissioned as an officer in the Australian Army. His family had already served in the Boer War, the Great War, and Reg joined up for the Second World War, fighting in Greece, Crete and North Africa before he was commissioned a lieutenant and patrol commander in New Guinea. And when the war ended, Reg wanted to keep serving, so he volunteered for the British Commonwealth Occupation Force in Japan. But they would not accept Aboriginals, nor could he buy a beer with his comrades in many of the pubs in Australia. The colour of his skin that was good enough for war was not good enough for peace. So he settled here in Melbourne with his young wife Dorothy. She herself had served in the Women's Auxiliary Australian Air Force, and Reg took what jobs he could. He was a tram conductor for a time, and may well have rattled along the lines of St Kilda Road that runs beside us this morning. You could forgive him if he was dispirited by rejection and discrimination. But when there was trouble in Korea, Reg joined up again. He was appointed a captain with the 3rd Battalion and fought at the Battle of Kapyong. In the air over Korea, the famed No. 77 Squadron of the RAAF served with impact and bravery from the very start of the Korean War, and were the first Australians into action. The squadron was formed in 1942. They fought through the Second World War and then stayed in Japan until 1950. And they were just about to return to Australia when the war began in Korea. So they didn't get home. They went straight back into a new fight. They flew almost 19,000 sorties in the conflict, and their service was so inspiring that the squadron was said to have helped secure the ANZAC treaty with the United States. But the cost was enormous. 1 in 4 pilots from No. 77 Squadron were killed or taken prisoner. And when our soldiers came home from Korea in 1953, they returned to a country that was still weary of war. And they didn't get the welcome nor recognition that we owed them. And it's not the first time we've made that mistake. But for us now, the ones who carry our history forward, the Korean War will only be the forgotten war if we let it. Because for the more than 17,000 Australian men and women who served there, it won't be forgotten, nor for the 1,200 who were wounded. And for the 339 killed, with 43 missing in action, it can't be forgotten. And with Australian personnel continuing to serve in the DMZ between North and South Korea, still the deadliest strip of land in the world, the conflict has not ended, even 70 years later. So to the veterans of the Korean War and their families, thank you. You are loved and respected, and we remain proud and grateful. In the history of our country at war, 103,021 Australians have fallen. Trooper Victor Jones was the first soldier from an Australian unit to be killed in combat. He was in B Company of the Queensland Mounted Infantry and died near South Africa's Modder River on New Year's Day, 1900, in the Boer War. It was the first day of a new century and exactly 1 year before Australia became a nation. Victor Jones came from Rockhampton and worked in the gold mines. His mates called him a fine and steady young gentleman. And fighting in South Africa as he waited for one century to end, he must have wondered what the new one had planned for him when he got home. But he didn't get to see it. And more wars came, the size of which this lad from the subtropics could not have imagined, with battles and campaigns that brought enormous loss, such as the Battle of Fromelles, 1916, with 5,500 casualties in just one night. The battles of Bullecourt, 10,000 killed or wounded. Gallipoli, where the ANZAC was born. More than 11,000 Australian and New Zealand troops killed. The New Guinea campaign from 1942, when the world was already in war, there was a new threat, and this one was coming straight at us. We know Australia would have been lost if not for the soldiers in the mud of Kokoda, the sailors in the Coral Sea, and the pilots who may have been outnumbered and outgunned by the Japanese but still got their planes in the air anyway. Australia was saved by 7,000 Australians, and the 7,000 Australians who saved it would never see home again. Over 1,000 Australian POWs and civilians were lost with the sinking of the Japanese vessel Montevideo Maru in 1942, the wreckage of which has only just been found a few days ago. A year later, 268 medical personnel, civilians and troops were killed when the hospital ship Centaur was torpedoed off Point Lookout, Queensland, taking just 3 minutes to sink. And this year marks the 55th anniversary of the battles of Coral Balmoral in the Vietnam War. It was our biggest campaign in the conflict against the strongest of the North Vietnamese forces and our biggest loss of life in Vietnam. 3 weeks of fighting brought an Australian victory, but Coral Balmoral cost 25 lives and 109 wounded. We welcome all veterans of Vietnam and their families today. Since the first Australian lost in war, our troops have died in the deserts, the fields, the sea, the air, the jungles, the torn-up cities of Europe, the small towns that still talk with reverence of the Australians who saved them, and the attacks on our very homes, such as Darwin and Sydney Harbour. And after that first name, Victor Jones, 103,020 more were lost to us. Behind each were shattered families and mates, communities gutted, broken generations that could only be survived, never fully repaired. And yet when each new conflict came, the next generation was ready to serve. Since Trooper Victor Jones, the loss has been unthinkable, yet the capacity for bravery and sacrifice seems inexhaustible. We welcome the members of our peacekeeping forces who have served in places across the world that were completely without peace, like Rwanda and the massacre at the refugee camp of Kibeho in April '95, where an Australian medical team led by Captain Carol Vaughan Evans treated and evacuated the wounded, including many children, even while under fire, with our medics taking cover behind vehicles and sandbags. 3 medals of gallantry were awarded from the action, including to Captain Vaughan Evans, the only female to ever receive the medal, and the first gallantry medals since Vietnam. Platoon Sergeant Kevin O'Halloran was there, and he wrote of the events years later. He said this: "Fear is infectious, but what I didn't realise until Kibeho was that courage is infectious in the same way." Long before PTSD was an acronym, servicemen and women have returned home and struggled to get back the lives they had or the lives they wanted. It wasn't fully understood, and sometimes it still isn't. This morning we welcome the veterans of the Afghanistan War. More than 26,000 Australians served in Afghanistan. It was our biggest and longest war, with 41 deaths and hundreds wounded. It was a place of fierce fighting, the danger of ambush, hidden explosives, remote patrol bases, and often unidentifiable enemies. At the Battle of Khazar-e-Azgan, our troops travelling in convoy were ambushed by 200 Taliban. It was one of our largest battles since Vietnam, and where Trooper Mark Donaldson of the SAS ran 80 metres in the open to save an interpreter, to where he received the Victoria Cross. And Sergeant Troy Simmons, who was one of 9 Australians wounded in the battle, still carries a Taliban bullet in his pelvis to this day. We remember Afghanistan as a place of great sacrifice. In the August of 2012, 3 Australians, Private Robert Pote, Lance Corporal Stefan Milosevic, and Sapper James Martin were killed at their patrol base. Their mission was to train Afghan National Army, but a once trusted Afghan soldier fired on the men as they rested. It was a slow and heartbreaking war, and its consequences surround us in our news, in our homes, in our hospitals, and in our streets. And we know veterans of all conflicts suffer from disconnection, addiction, homelessness, and thoughts of taking their own lives. When they go away to serve, we need them, but when they return, they need us. Today, we honour the sacrifice, the courage, the true and unquestioned mateship, the continuing struggles, and the service. And we do it with the real celebration and the real ceremony that is inside each of us and what's in our mind when the sun appears. We might think of Ren Saunders on that tram, or freezing winters of Korea, or a medic under fire, or a veteran lost in his own hometown, or people who thought their war was forgotten being told it is not. And those three strong and beautiful words become stronger still, lest we forget. Would the official party please be upstanding for the dawn service? Let silent contemplation be your offering. Dr. Robert Webster, State President, RSL Victoria, will recite the ode.
In memory of the fallen. They went with songs to the battle. They were young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end against odds uncounted. They fell with their faces to the foe. They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
lest we forget. Stand down.
The official party may now be seated. We now welcome Professor James Angus, Lieutenant Governor of Victoria, to present the ANZAC Day Address.
Mr Anthony Howard, the Honourable Daniel Andrews, Premier of Victoria, the Honourable Bill Shorten, representing the Prime Minister of Australia, Mr Matt Bark, representing the Leader of the Victorian Opposition, the Right Honourable the Lord Mayor Sally Capp, Senator David Van, representing the Leader of the Federal Opposition, Shane Patton, Chief Commissioner of Victoria Police, Captain Stephen Bowater, Chair of the Shrine Trustees, Dr Robert Webster, State President, and members of RSL Victoria, and members of other ex-service organisations, Victorian senior officers of the Australian Defence Force, representatives of the New Zealand Defence Force and other Defence Forces, members of the Consular Corps. I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered, the Bunurong, Boon Wurrong and Wiradjuri Woi Wurrong peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to the elders past and present, and thank in particular Uncle Shane Clark for his warm welcome to country this morning. I also want to acknowledge past and present members of the Australian Defence Force with us today, and thank each and every one of you for your service. And given this year marks the 70th anniversary of the end of the Korean War, I particularly want to acknowledge the veterans of that conflict. More than 17,000 Australians served in the Korean War between 1950 and 1953. They were soldiers and sailors, airmen and nurses. Of those servicemen and women, 30 were captured, 1,216 wounded, and 340 were killed. After the armistice, Australians stayed on the Korean Peninsula as peacekeepers for another 4 years. But their service and sacrifice was, compared to the world wars, largely overlooked at the time. This morning, at Melbourne's most sacred place, we have an opportunity to make amends by commemorating the 17,000 who fought in the Korean War. To that end, I would like to read 2 short excerpts from unit war diaries written during the Korean conflict. Unit war diaries are, by necessity, exercises in brevity. They compress the actions of the longest days into terse, sawn-off sentences. But occasionally, the single-spaced, typewritten pages of those diaries are a doorway into the past, because they reveal a glimmer of how much was asked and how much was given and how much it all means. Take ANZAC Day 1952, for example. The 1st Battalion Royal Australian Regiment, 1 RAR, hadn't yet seen action. The battalion had only landed in Korea earlier that month. When they sailed into Busan port, they'd been welcomed by a Royal Marine Band playing Waltzing Matilda. Now, 3 weeks later, 71 years ago today, they found themselves standing on a parade ground carved out of a paddy field with men from 3 RAR, the 17th Field Battery of the Royal New Zealand Artillery, and the King's Own Scottish Borders. Representatives of the Turkish Army were also on hand, making that ANZAC Day an historic occasion. The unit's war diary explains why it was historic. It reads, "This day was the first occasion in history on which our former enemies, the Turks, were present with us to pay homage to those who fell on the barren slopes of Gallipoli." Another day, December the 1st, 1951, is more tragic than historic. The diary entry for that day on HMAS Sydney reads as follows: "A costly day, during which 54 sorties were flown. 4 Sea Furies were hit by flak, 2 being lost and 2 other damaged. Sub-Lieutenant Sinclair, RAN, was killed when his body struck the tailplane of his aircraft whilst bailing out. The body was recovered by helicopter and at 17:30 hours, buried at sea. That young airman was just 22. What I take from those entries is this: every ANZAC Day is both historic and tragic. Historic because each year marks the anniversary of another war, another battle. Tragic because of the terrible price paid by young Australians like Sub-Lieutenant Sinclair to create that history, our history. In other words, their sacrifice is our inheritance. And as the inheritors of ANZAC Day, we have an obligation to never forget the past sacrifices that made possible our future. With that in mind, I would like to conclude by reading the opening lines from the unit diary of 1 RAR for April 25, 1952. The entry, written by an unknown soldier, is as follows: "A grey, overcast sky heralded in another ANZAC Day to members of 1 RAR. For those who served in World War II, it brought vivid memories of those comrades who made the supreme sacrifice in the case of freedom. For those of the new generation, it brought the knowledge that within a very short time, they too would know, understand, and share in this wonderful spirit of ANZAC." At the conclusion, the bugle call sounded the retreat, and all present observed the 2-minute silence, a silence broken only by the distant sound of artillery fire, continuing the battle for freedom, lest we forget.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. The poem In Flanders Fields by Colonel John McCrae will now be recited by Ms. Caitlin Fankhauser, Shrine Young Ambassador.
In Flanders Fields by John McCrae. In Flanders Fields the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place. And in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields.
Thank you, Caitlin. The Melbourne Symphony Orchestra Chorus, accompanied by the Navy Band, present Abide With Me. Will the official party please be upstanding as the Navy Band and the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra Chorus present the national anthems of New Zealand and Australia.
Bye.
The official party will now move to the sanctuary of the Shrine of Remembrance, where the Lieutenant Governor will lay a wreath. Members of the official party are carrying red poppies, which they will lay at the stone. The red poppy, symbolic of Remembrance Day, is now used at all services honouring our veterans. The red poppies were the first flowers to grow in the springs at Flanders and across the once battle-mangled land of the Western Front during the First World War. And the sweet and delicate red bloom is a sign of life, a symbol of giving, and a reminder that even from the horror, there will be a future. With the official party in position in the sanctuary, I invite the Shrine Guard to mount. The Lieutenant Governor will now lay a wreath at the Stone of Remembrance on behalf of the people of Victoria. The Lieutenant Governor will now depart while the pipes and drums of the 5th 6th Battalion of the Royal Victoria Regiment perform Sands of Kuwait with the Navy Band. The official party will lay their poppies as they follow the Lieutenant Governor's departure. Shrine Guard, please dismount. That concludes the ANZAC Day Dawn service. On behalf of RSL Victoria, thank you for standing with us in this peaceful reflection of dawn here at the Shrine of Remembrance. As we remember all those who served and the people who miss them and love them. You will shortly be welcome to lay a poppy in the sanctuary. We invite you to make your way to the North Steps. Thank you. Good morning. Lest we forget.
And now I have to try and find my voice after all that. As I said, I'm going to raise a glass, and I apologise if anyone is offended or whatnot, but I can see no greater or appropriate toast than the ode itself. For they shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. To our brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, anyone who has lost their life in combat, both at home and abroad. Cheers. Lest we forget. Thank you all for joining me for this. It's I thought it was something appropriate to share with you all, and I think it's a little bit of Australian history that many of you obviously didn't know existed, as I saw from some of the messages. So, never heard of Anzac Day till now? Thank you for sharing and enriching your lives. You're very welcome, and yeah. Alright guys, I'm going to get out of here. I will be back for my usual show in just under an hour and a half, and I will see you all then. I'm not going to play the outro for obvious reasons, but of course, snafu. Alright, see you later. Cheers.